Hi, I'm Ken Lammers. Welcome to Minor League Matters. And today we're going to talk about the flaws in professional soccer. And with that, let's get cracking. Okay, so I've started watching professional soccer over the last couple of years because the minor league program is kind of got up and running in the U.S. pretty well. The major league soccer program in the U.S. really is pretty much a minor league program for European soccer itself. And, soccer is just such a big sport around the world that it's something that's worth taking note of. It's probably somewhere around number 4 in the U.S. It and hockey are probably bumping around with each other, trying to figure out which is the fourth tier sport behind baseball and football, basketball, and then, like I say, hockey or soccer. It has a substantial following, particularly out west, not as much in the east, which is unusual for most American sports. And of course, there are Americans all over the country who are watching it over in Europe, in Bundesliga or La Liga or the Premier League in Great Britain. So it's something worth taking note of. And as I start to watch it, I notice that there are flaws in it. Now, as I'm sure that people will say in the comments below, because I can't think of something that would draw more hate than saying that soccer's not great. Hate overseas, hate with locals, all that sort of stuff. I'm not saying it's not great, but there are flaws in the system. And anybody who tells me that there are flaws in baseball and American football and hockey and basketball, but I just don't notice them because I grew up with the sport, point taken. But I didn't grow up with soccer. It was basically not even a tertiary sport in the United States when I was growing up, and then it became a female sport. Now it's becoming kind of an acceptable sport for guys to go watch, kind of. And so as I go along and I'm watching, I'm noticing flaws because I'm an adult and didn't learn this as a minor. I'm catching these flaws, and here's what they are. And some of this applies mainly to European leagues, and some of it doesn't, and some of it plays back and forth and could be a purposeful choice. So let's start out with the 4 flaws of soccer. Now, across the entire sport, there is one flaw. That is the standing system. The standing systems in soccer is such that whatever league you're in, if you get a win, you have 3 points. You get 3 points towards your standing. If you get a tie, which is called a draw in soccer most places, you get 1 point towards your standing. And of course, if you get a loss, you get 0. So what you end up with, say you have 2 wins, 2 ties, 2 draws, I should say, and 2 losses. You get 3 points for each win, that's 6. 1 point for each draw, that's 2, and 0 for the losses. And you end up with 8 points, right? Okay, that's not a terrible system, particularly if you're going to leave draws in. I'm not a fan of that, but I understand it's something that's the way it is, and it ain't never changing, right? But it's there, and giving it a third of the points that you give an actual win is actually a pretty solid way of pointing it out. Now, the problem is in the second part of standings. So if you're doing the point system that I just described, you can very well end up with a situation where 2 or 3 teams have the same number of points. There has to be a secondary deciding factor. And the secondary deciding factor in soccer is goal differential. What this means is this is something that has been basically gotten rid of in American sports, with the exception of soccer now, because it's just a terrible way to decide things. Goal differential, for those of you who don't understand, is if in the last 3 games you've scored 8 goals and your opponents have scored 5 goals, you have a +3 to your goal differential. If in the last 3 games you've scored 4 goals and your opponents have scored 8 goals, you have a -4 to your goal differential. And that's a problem, right? It's a problem in that it does two things. First of all, it encourages better teams to run up goals, right? So if you are Manchester United and you're playing Crystal Palace, right, and you know you're just going to wipe the floor with this team, right? And so why don't you play your scrubs and just get them some playing time and get your fans to some view of who's coming in the future? Well, the reason you don't is because of goal differential. And so, if you can score 12 goals against Crystal Palace as Manchester you should. Now, that's a strategic decision because at the end of the season, there are no playoffs or anything in Europe. This is different in the States. This doesn't really count for the States. But in Europe, there are no playoffs at the end of the season. So, it's just what your standings are at the end that determines whether or not you win. So, if you have the same number of points as Manchester United and the Hotspurs or Arsenal has the same number of points or Man City has the same number of points as you then go to goal differential. And if you have not gone out there and got every single goal that you can, including running up the score on bad teams or lesser teams, then there's a chance you don't win on goal differential, and that's just a terrible decision on your coach's part. Now, mind you, in the individual game, is this poor sportsmanship? Heck yeah, it's poor sportsmanship. It's a terrible thing to do to another team, right? Is it bad for the fans? Yeah, it's bad for the fans. Heck, this is bad for your own fans. Your own fans, who wants to watch a 12-0 game? It's 12-0 match. It's other than maybe, this is the most goals that have ever been scored in a one soccer match on a day. That might be something that would be interesting, but that match is going to be terrible, all around terrible. So it does that. The second problem with goal differential as a way of deciding is that it disfavors defensive teams. So if you've got two teams that have got the same number of points, right, at the end of the season or at any point in the season, and one of them's a defensive team that never allows more than one goal, right? It either wins by one goal or it loses by one goal, but it never allows more than one goal, right? An amazing defense. On the other side, you've got an offensive team that will win by 6, lose by 4, win by 8, lose by 7, that sort of thing. And it's, but at the end of the season, everybody knows the defensive team can beat the offensive team. And they've gone head-to-head twice. The defensive team has won both those times. And, everybody knows it's a better team. But they have the same amount of points. And the defensive team has very low goal differential. So let's say it has, 15 plus, right? Whereas the offensive team, which has run up several games against really minor opponents, has a 42 goal differential. Everybody knows that the offensive team can't beat the defensive team, and yet because of the way the standings are laid out, it wins. So that's a problem in scoring. That's a problem in scoring all over soccer, and it's not going to change anytime soon. Okay, number 2 is promotion relegation. In some ways, promotion relegation is one of the brilliant parts of European soccer, right? If you are in a lower league, promotion relegation really gives you impetus to either fight to keep from getting moved down or to fight to get moved up. There is no reason to stick around in the center of a lower league, right? You're not making tons of money or anything there. You're at a lower league, you're probably making money off of whatever your fans pay as they come in the door and whatever concessions they buy, right? You're not getting rich. So you want to move up, and other teams want you to move down from the other leagues. For Americans who don't understand what promotion relegation is, let's say there's 4 tiers in soccer. And the 4th tier, its top 3 teams move up to the 3rd tier, while the bottom 3 teams of the 3rd tier move down to the 4th. Same thing happens at the juncture between the 3rd and the 2nd tier. 3 teams from the 3rd tier move up, 3 teams from the 2nd tier move down. And the same thing happens at the juncture between the 1st tier and the 2nd tier. 3 teams from the 2nd tier move up, 3 teams from the 1st tier move down. And it's a way of making sure that your bottom teams are fighting through the end of the season. So your bottom 5 or 6 teams are probably fighting like madmen to keep from getting relegated. Your top teams are fighting to move up. And that's an important thing, not so much in the United States, but it's an important thing in Europe because of another difference that's that's a flaw in soccer in Europe. They don't have playoffs at the end of the season. That's flaw number 3. And everybody will tell you, well, that's not important. That's a terrible thing that American soccer does. No, it's not a terrible thing. It actually accomplishes something. It makes teams play through to the end of the season. Now, in your lower level teams, or lower tier teams, they'll play through to the end of the season. The top 5 or 6 teams will, because they're trying to get promoted. However, once you get to the top level league, that's not happening anymore. There's no impetus from the league itself to play for 2nd or 3rd, and keep fighting. Once you've gone 2/3 of the way through the season, say, or 3/4 of the way through the season, and it becomes very clear that, say, in the Premier League, the Manchester United is going to win the league, right? It becomes very clear that that's going to happen. There is no force from inside the league itself that makes you try to play for 2nd or 3rd, or 4th. There's not even, period, a reason to play if you're going to end up in the 4th slot. So what happens there? Well, then what happens is, if you realize you're not going to by points get to the top, and there's no tournament, mind you, look at the American leagues like the USL, right? It takes 8 teams from the East and 8 teams from the West. Now that's too many. It probably should be 4 from each, but it takes 8 teams from each side, and all the way through the end, there are teams that are fighting to get into that 8. So your top 10 to 12 teams are fighting to get in. And within that 8, there's a fight to see who's going to be hosting games, hosting matches. So your top 4 teams host matches, and your bottom 4 go and they're visitors. They want to fight their way into that top 4 so they can host matches and get home field advantage. It provides an impetus, a reason to continue to fight through the end of the season. Beyond that, the 4th flaw in soccer, and this is something that's more European than it is in the U.S., because there are no playoffs in soccer in a league, they concentrate more on the outside tournaments, the Champions League, the FA Cup, that sort of thing. It makes more sense once you realize you're not going to get first place to try to win the Champions League. It makes more sense to try to win the FA Cup once you realize you're not going to make first and you're not in danger of relegation. So what happens here? You end up playing, if you've got 2 games that week, one of which is your game for your fans at home, and one of which is a Champions League match or an FA Cup match. You don't put your good players in against Brighton or against Crystal Palace or whomever. You put your good players into the game against that team from Spain, or your good players into that game against that whatever schlub teams from the 3rd tier that's in the FA Cup, right? You put that foot forward because that's what you get a reward for. You go forward towards a win if you win in the FA Cup. You go forward towards a win if you win in the Champions League. You don't in your own home league. The Champions League has filled the slot as the impetus for trying to fight your way towards the top of your home league, right? Because there's the fact that there's no impetus, no playoff in your home league has led to an outside force, Champions League, to come in, and depending on what league your home league is, the top 3 teams in your league go to Champions League, or the top 2 teams in your league go to Champions League, or the top 1 team in your league goes to the Champions League. Now, if you're one of the leagues where only the top 1 team goes, you don't care. It's the same situation. If you're second or third, you don't care. You're not playing for number 1 anymore after a certain point in the season. You trade off players, you lend players, you do whatever. You play your local version of the FA Cup, that sort of thing, and you don't concentrate on winning your league anymore. If you're one of those, if you're one of the ones that's got 2 teams that go from it, yeah, you fight to become 1 or 2. And if you're one of the teams that's got 3 teams, or one of the leagues that's got 3 teams going to the Champions League, you fight to become one of those 3, right? Thus, an outside force has come in and forced your teams in your league to play because your league isn't forcing them to play to the end of the season itself, which is kind of sad, actually. So those are your flaws in the system. American soccer, say what you will about it, the fact that it has a championship at the end of the season is a good thing. A championship tournament at the end of the season, it's a good thing because it keeps your upper level teams playing. The flaws in American soccer is they don't do promotion relegation, so your teams at the bottom don't have an incentive to play. Now, this doesn't hurt as much in American soccer as it does in other American sports. In other American sports where there's no promotion relegation, it's not something we do here. The bottom teams, after a certain point in the season, or maybe from the very beginning of the season, they tank. They purposely tank seasons. They have the worst record they can possibly get because they want the first draft in the NFL draft pick. They want the first draft in the Major League Baseball pick. They want the first basketball draft. And I'm sure the same thing happens in hockey, although I don't follow hockey well enough to know. And if you can get the first draft pick, you can get somebody like Hunter Green or somebody who you expect to be amazing. Well, that doesn't play out as much in American soccer because if you're an American soccer club, say you're the Columbus Crew, the Revolution, the Galaxy, whatever, and you tank on purpose for the entire season, so you get to go to the draft and you get the first choice. And you get to draft the first player that's bad enough to play in U.S. soccer. It's not the same thing. If you're drafting in Major League Baseball, you're drafting in NFL football, you're drafting in NBA basketball, you're drafting the first best player, period, right? Because you're the top league in the world. If you're drafting at Major League Soccer, you're drafting the first guy who's not good enough to go play in Europe. That's just reality. And so promotion relegation doesn't really hurt as badly. The fact that it doesn't exist doesn't really hurt as badly Major League Soccer as it does other sports. However, it would be nice, right? And the NASL has died on this hill, right? Obviously, they've not been recertified as a Tier 2 soccer league. They don't appear to be trying to become 3 or 4 or whatever, and with the lawsuit and all. And so there are issues. But the fact they have a playoff at the end is a good thing for American soccer. Promotion relegation tends to work really well in European soccer, and it's the good thing about that soccer league until you get to the top league in every nation, every area, which doesn't have a reason to play for the top of the league anymore unless an outside force such as the Champions League makes that happen. Your local league is kind of useless at that point. Your top league is kind of useless at that point. All you get is some rivalry games, and that's it. One team gets the win through at the end of the season. It's a flaw. And that's kind of what I'm seeing out of soccer so far. Yes, I realize that I have gone past FIFA and all the flaws of FIFA and all the corruption that's there, still there, has been there, will be there, and the flaws in United States Soccer Federation and all that, all the flaws that are there, and its cozy deals with MLS and all that sort of stuff, or apparent cozy deals. I don't have any proof of anything, and so. Yeah, I've gone past all that because I was actually trying to talk about things that would affect the way things are played on the field, not just the sport in general. Okay, so if you like what you've seen here, hit like. If you like what you see all around here generally, hit subscribe. You can write all sorts of stuff in the comments and tell me how terrible I am and what I don't understand about the sport, and I'll read them, but I ain't guaranteeing you're getting any kind of replies because, let's face it, folks, I got a day job. So, with that, I got one thing left to say. Go watch some minor league sports. Have a good day.